This is a webinar about CESR under the 2021 curriculum. The speakers today are me. My name's Megan Wilson, and I look after CESR at JCST. And the other speakers are Mr. John Lund, who is the chair of JCST, and Mr. Keith Jones, who is the ISCP Surgical Director. So the first thing that I do need to say is that CESR is a GMC process. You apply directly to the GMC and the GMC make the decisions on your application. The GMC just asked JCST to evaluate applications on their behalf. So we don't own the process. So the purpose of the webinar today is to explain about the 2021 curriculum and how this works for CESR. So while we want to cover general points and talk generally about the 2021 curriculum, which is structured differently, what we can't do is discuss issues around individual applications. Also, we can't address very specialty specific queries. And if you can't find the answers to those in the relevant curriculum or the specialty specific guidance, then you may need to actually email us. So all the documents that we're all going to talk about or reference, they're either on the JCST CESR webpage, and there's a link on that slide there, or we've given links to it because some of the documents are, of course, GMC documents. So this webinar is going to cover an overview of the changes to the curricula, and that's both some of the changes to the generic part of the curricula and some specialty specific changes, but it's an overview. It's very much an overview. I do want to stress that. We'll talk about the GMC's general professional capabilities, which they have said need to be incorporated into all curricula. And we'll talk about the capabilities in practice, which we call CiPs. And what those are the surgical outcomes. So the GMC has said that all curricula have to be outcomes based. We'll also talk about the multiple consultant report and how it works for CESR. So we call that the MCR, and it will work for CESR a little differently than it will do for trainees, and it's a new form of assessment. And then we'll talk about how this all fits together. And in order to do that, I will take you through the specialty specific guidance for the 2021 curriculum. The standard for CESR is actually set out in primary legislation, which is now in the Medical Act. And what the legislation says is that it has to be equivalence to a CCT in the specialty in question. And what this means is equivalence to the curriculum that's in place at the time at which you apply. And not only do you have to demonstrate that you've gained those competencies, but you have to show that you're still maintaining them. And you have to show that you're maintaining them currently. So the period of which we will look at the evidence that you provide for CESR will focus on the 6 years prior to the application. And that's nothing to do with the length of training, but that's actually to do with to ensure currency. So next slide, please. So just to sort of stress again that the standard is equivalence to the whole of the curriculum. It's the breadth and depth of the curriculum, and it's the breadth and depth of the curriculum that's in place at the time that you apply. So that's what you have to demonstrate. So usually what happens is as soon as a new curriculum is approved, that's the curriculum you have to use to apply for CESR under. So in theory, this new 2021 curriculum was actually approved in November 2020. But what the GMC have said, because it's all sort of quite complicated and it's quite new, they have said that people can choose whether to apply under the 2021 curriculum or the curriculum that I'm probably going to refer to as the current curriculum. And you can do that until the 1st of August 2023. So at that stage, when you actually decide to apply, there literally is a button and you press it and say apply now, and this is the curriculum I want to apply under. So you can apply under the curriculum that we're going to describe to you today, or indeed you can apply under the current curriculum, and you can do that until, as I say, the 1st of August 2023. So next slide, please, Rachel. Okay, so the next slide, I'm going to actually pass you over to Mr. Keith Jones, and he's actually going to talk about the new curriculum and what it looks like.
Listen, I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you very much, Megan, for the introduction and for taking us to this point. So the new curriculum that have been put in place from this August 2021 were required by the GMC. The GMC required those to be applied to all specialties and not just surgical specialties. And the greatest changes, those curricula are outcomes based, and the outcome based component contains content that is shared between all the specialties. That content that is shared across the specialties are the GMC's generic professional capabilities. Those were written and designed by the GMC in cooperation with the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. So this slide coming forward will highlight the generic professional capabilities. There are 9, as you see on the screen. Those 9 domains have descriptors that, again, written by the GMC, and bullet points that develop those professional behaviours, moving through to skills and knowledge, and then the capabilities as documented. There is more information, including the descriptors for each of these GPCs, that can be found in the GMC's generic professional capabilities framework, and we will provide you with that link with your set of the slides. Arshad, I hope you can see the slides again. I see the point you put up in the chat. If we then move on to the next component, for surgery, the outcomes that need to carry out in a specific day-to-day task undertaken by a consultant surgeon, so undertaken to the level of a day one consultant, are described as the capabilities in practice. For surgery, there are 5 shared CiPs, and which are the moving on to the next slide, which show the management of the outpatient clinic, the management of the unselected emergency take, the management of the inpatients, essentially that's inclusive of ward rounds and inpatient assessment, the management of the operating list, and that's not just the technical component of operating, that's the management of the whole list, from the generating the list to the working with anaesthetic colleagues, the anaesthetic assessment, all the way continued through to their post-operative care, discharge planning and rehabilitation. And finally, the management of the multidisciplinary team working. And again, with the slides, we'll provide you with a link to the CiPs, which gives you all of the descriptors and that you will be able to look at those in full. The shared capabilities are assessed by degrees of supervision, whereas the GPCs within surgery are assessed as their appropriateness to the phase of training. The specialty specific CiPs, there are 3, relate, shown on the next slide, to cardiothoracic surgery, where there is a CiP related to the management, essentially, of the critical care component of cardiothoracics. And for paediatrics, again, the critical care management of the paediatric surgical patient. And for plastic surgery, could everyone mute? Sorry, a little bit of an echo there. for plastic surgery, that ensure that there's the safe assimilation of new technologies and advancing techniques within plastic surgery in practice. That skill is embedded within the CiPs for the other surgical specialties. The areas which are now generic to all surgical specialties are then displayed on the next slides, which are the certification requirements, or as are displayed within the curriculum, become the generic requirements that are shared between the surgical specialties. These could be broken down into research, the quality improvement, medical education and training, and medical management. This slide gives the details that you can find this in section 4 or section 5.4 in each of the respective curricula. Each of the respective curricula can be found or directed from the login page, so you don't have to enter the ISCP, but from the login page, and that point you can be directed to the curriculum pages, and therefore you can get all the details. The specialty specific guidance gives details of what evidence is required to be provided when applying for CESR. So the curriculum, which have changed most in terms of pattern of knowledge and skills required for certification, will be demonstrated within the next slide when we talk about the training pathways. Are felt to be cardiothoracic surgery, general surgery, and urology, and each of those relevant curricula give the details, but in essentially cardiothoracic surgery, there is now an initial period of training that is across cardiothoracic surgery, and then there's the possibility to move on to a cardiac or a thoracic pathway. Within general surgery, the curriculum has become modular, and there are 11 possible module combinations. One of these affects that the trainees following certain modules outlined in the curriculum will not be required to do emergency work in the final 2 years of training. And all trainees will be able to manage the unselected take up to the point of operation. So that relates to the decision making. So that's the end of what would be phase 2 of training, and all will be able to manage post-operative care. And the same application applies for CESR. For urology, there are special interest modules in the following 5 areas, those being endourology, oncology, andrology, female functional and reconstructive urology, and advanced general urology. And again, for the full details of those components, you can see those within the urology curriculum. Indeed, each of the surgical curriculum is very clearly shown and accessed via the carousel of the ISCP, and they are easily set out with the appropriate appendices that show all the requirements and the syllabus to which you would show. So I will now pass you back, or I'm going to pass it over to John Linden now, who's going to talk about the multiple consultant report, how it works in relation to CESR, and set up before we get to a question setting. Over to you, John.
So the following items are required for CESR to show evidence of the CiPs and the GPCs. The multiple consultant report with supervision levels at either 4 or 5. So supervision level 4, it means that the people with whom you work think that you're working in that capability and practice area at the level expected of a day 1 consultant. So obviously you need to have at least supervision level 4 across all the capabilities in practice for your specialty to show that you are working in all aspects of the job at the level of a day 1 consultant. Sometimes people are performing beyond the level of the day 1 consultant in one or more of the capabilities in practice, and so will be awarded and can be awarded supervision level 5 by their colleagues. So that's performing above the level expected of a day 1 consultant. You'll need to have your appraisals and personal development plans at least for 3 recent cycles, so 3 consecutive cycles leading up to your application. You'll also have to have some recent multi-source feedback, some evidence of communication with patients, and there's details about that on our website. Evidence of communication with colleagues and demonstrating collaboration with colleagues over management plans and patient care across multidisciplinary teams, however they work in your specialty. Next slide then, please, Rachel. And then just 3 more things. You need to demonstrate evidence of partnership with patients and obtaining consent in an appropriate manner, and also evidence of understanding the legal aspects of consent. And also, we all get complaints from time to time, and part of being a consultant is to be able to demonstrate that you can deal with these complaints in a satisfactory manner, and also be able to reflect on the complaints and how this might change your practice. So examples of complaint and handling and reflection on these. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to show you how the multiple consultant report works for trainees. So at the beginning of a placement, trainees will have a meeting with their clinical and educational supervisors, and they set up a learning agreement. And obviously this is something that if you're not in training, you won't have. This is reviewed halfway through the placement to give feedback on the performance through the first half, and then either to carry on or to reset those objectives at the halfway point of the placement. And at the end of the placement, all the supervisors meet and they jointly report. You jointly form a multiple consultant report and give a supervision level as they have in the others. And so this benchmarks the trainee's progression through training relative to the end of training, which is supervision level 4 in all of the capabilities in practice. And as I said earlier, level 5 is also there to demonstrate excellence in performing above the level of a day 1 consultant. So for trainees, this is an iterative process. It goes round and round through each placement and in successive placements, and it's progressive and development. There is lots and lots of structured, formative and summative feedback to trainees as they progress through training. And obviously they receive lower supervision levels at the start of training, and as they become more competent and capable, the amount of supervision that requires to be given is less, and so their supervision level increases towards supervision level 4, that amount of supervision you need for independent practice to practice at a level of a day 1 consultant. And this is a major part of the trainee assessment process in the new curricula, and links directly into the ARCP and decision process made by the ARCP panel on progression. Okay, next slide, please. So given that the MCR is really very closely linked with the logistics of training, so the placements, the beginning, middle and end supervision meeting of training, it doesn't really work in the same way for CESR, for people who aren't in training who want to apply for CESR. And so we have a separate MCR for CESR, and you can find this in the CESR section of the JCST website, so that's jcst.org/CESR. And you shouldn't use the version on ISCP. I saw that there was a comment in a question in the chat bar about this. Don't use the version of the ISCP. But use the version on the JCST website. And of course, you don't have to sign up to the ISCP to make a CESR application. You may well want to sign up for the ISCP for using it as your online portfolio and other interactions and etc. But you don't have to sign up to the ISCP to make a CESR application. So the MCR for CESR is like the final MCR that a trainee would have. And so it's a summative assessment. It's an assessment at the end of training, which would hopefully demonstrate that you are ready to be a day 1 consultant, ready for independent practice across all the capability and practice areas of your specialty, but also in the generic professional capabilities areas. So you need to be able to do all those things that any doctor needs to be able to do, the generic professional capabilities, you need to be professionally capable, but also the specific specialty capabilities described by your curriculum and across the working week, as Keith covered earlier. It should, your MCR should cover the 6 months before you make the CESR application, so it needs to be done prospectively. The form, and it's a multiple consultant report, so the form is designed for more than one consultant to complete it at once. Having one consultant complete the MCR isn't enough. It's not a mono consultant report, it's a multiple consultant report. So 2 or more consultants with whom you work on a regular basis across the scope of your practice and across the scope of the CiPs should complete it. With all the evidence, as with all the evidence for CESR, the onus is on you, the applicant, to provide the MCR. So it's you that needs to approach the consultants directly and ask them to complete the MCR form. Next slide, please, Rachel. Okay, so because the MCR should reflect at least a 6 months period before your application is submitted for CESR, you should begin this process when you begin to gather the evidence together for CESR. And what you should do is approach the consultants with whom you work and provide them with all the documentation from the website about CESR for reference. And this is all on that same website, jcst.org/CESR. There's no specific guidance for consultant reviewers. There is specific guidance for consultant reviewers, giving links to all the relevant documentation. There's also guidance for you as an applicant, and also a sample of a completed MCR for CESR, just showing what one might look like to give everybody an idea of what they do. Many of the consultants with whom you work will have trainees and be familiar with the MCR as a concept, and also the capabilities in practice and generic professional capabilities. But you need to notify the consultants at least 6 months before that you'll be doing this, and give them links to that, so that they're aware that this next 6 month period they'll need to observe you relative to the end of the curriculum. Once the consultant rates has developed an opportunity to see the documentation, you should arrange a meeting with them. And then from this, you should all agree something like a learning agreement. So what are you going to do over the next 6 months or so before your CESR application to make sure that you're ready to reach supervision level 4? And you can do this, of course, not as a learning agreement, but part of your appraisal and your personal development plan. The main thing is that the consultant raters are fully aware of the report that they need to produce at the end of that, in inverted commas, placement, the end of that 6 month block leading up to your CESR application. And so when they're working with you, they can keep the generic professional capabilities and the capabilities in practice in mind when they're working with you. So it's very easy for them to complete an objective assessment through the CESR MCR at the end of that 6 months. That initial meeting at 6 months, where you alert the consultant to the consultants that you will be asking to do the MCR for you, should be documented. You can make this as a letter signed by the consultants setting out the objective of the period, but there needs to be something submitted with your application to demonstrate that that meeting has taken place at least 6 months in advance of your CESR application, so that everybody can be assured that that period of observation has taken place. And the MCR for CESR should be prospective, and so a letter will be sufficient to provide evidence for this. Next slide, please. So at the end of this 6 month block, this placement, again in inverted commas, the raters, your consultant colleagues, should meet. This can be in person or virtually, and provide and complete the report and put in a supervision level. They should use the descriptors for the generic professional capabilities and the capabilities in practice to do this. And again, you'll find links to these from the website. You can also find the CP. And you can also find lots of these on our videos about CiPs and generic professional capabilities on our YouTube site, which is obviously open and free to access. If one of the people who you work with, one of the consultants, is unable to comment on a certain aspect of your practice, for example, if I hadn't worked with you in an area, perhaps I hadn't been on the emergency take with you, then you can ask another consultant to comment on this particular area. If it may be that when you're doing this, you can do one beforehand, maybe at the start of the process, not an official one, an MCR, but just to see where there might be gaps for you to address between where you are now and where you need to be when you make that CESR application. When you make that CESR application, you need to be at the level of a day one consultant, and so your consultants need to be able to put that you are supervision level 4 or 5. So it might be worth doing an informal one near the start, so you can flag up some areas that you might need to work on and particularly address over the next 6 months or so. And this is exactly what trainees do through training. You'll need at least one final MCR for CESR, and you can use the MCR part of your evidence gathering and development. If you're acting as a mentor to CESR applicants, it can also be a very useful tool. You can help people realise for themselves what they need to do, and a self-assessment using the same tool is a very, very powerful tool for identifying your own learning needs over the coming months. Next slide, please. So it may be that you don't want to, or you're unable to provide an MCR or parts of the MCR as evidence. And it may be that you just don't do that particular area of practice with those consultants that is covered by one of the CiPs, for instance. And if MCR is either not there or part of it's not there, then you need to provide some alternative evidence. So if a consultant hasn't been able to comment on a capability in practice or a GPC at a certain aspect because I've not observed you and you can't find another colleague who has, because it's an equivalence process, CESR as opposed to training, you can provide alternative evidence that isn't contained in the MCR. So for instance, if not one of your consultants has observed you in an outpatient clinic, you can provide alternative equivalent evidence, but only if they haven't observed you, not because you haven't done it. Obviously you've done it. There's just, many of you be working in outpatients independently, and you might not work alongside consultant colleagues for them to observe you. And so there's a list of items that can demonstrate equivalence to the MCR or aspects of the MCR, which provided in Annex A of the 2021 version of the Specialty Specific Guidance, or SSG, for CESR. It's not an exhaustive list, and you might have other items to include, but it's a very good place to start. And again, you can find that at jcst.org/CESR. Next slide. So when you're thinking about equivalence, please bear the following in mind. So the evidence, it needs to be very strong. You need to really reassure the assessors and the GMC who are going to, if you're successful, put your name on a specialist register, that you can show very strong evidence of equivalence in your performance in your specialty, which is equivalent to the outcome of the current training curriculum. And also, to help you do this and to help people understand that you've reached equivalence, you need to map the evidence to the CiPs and GPCs. So you have a bit of evidence that you've gathered looking through that list of suggestions, then you need to say which of the CiPs or GPCs that relates to you, and make that very, very clear in your submission. And you can use the descriptors to do this, and also it's important to reflect on your performance and provide reflection in your supporting evidence. Mapping the evidence means you should state which items show which equivalence to each of the GPCs and CiPs and headings, and describe why. It's really important that you provide evidence that makes what you have done in your role very clear. So the evidence you provide needs to show that you were active in those areas and performing a level required of the output, of the outcome of the curriculum, and a day one consultant.
So, okay, so the really key document that you need to look at in terms of making your CESR application is something called the Specialty Specific Guidance. It's something that is produced. It's produced jointly by us and the GMC, but it's hosted on the GMC website. So essentially, it's a GMC document. We've got specialty specific guidance for each specialty, and we have it for the current and the 2021 curriculum. And this document, it sets out how you should present your evidence, and the GMC base their application process actually on this. So they will ask you to provide things following through the specialty specific guidance. So next slides, please. So in terms of the specialty specific guidance under the 2021 curricula, there are actually 4 parts to it. So essentially this will mean 4 parts. Well, it's a lot more than 4 parts actually of the application, but think about it as 4 parts. So part 1, that's the items that the GMC always requires. So that's things like your CV, it's things like evidence of your primary medical qualification if you aren't already registered with the GMC and they haven't seen it before, evidence of specialist medical qualifications, all of that sort of thing. Part 2, and part 2 really is key. And so that comes from section 5.4 of your curriculum. So section 5.4, it's the same, well, it's not the same in every curriculum, but this will go through and it will tell you sort of what sort of numbers you need, what the index procedures are, what the what the index procedures are, what the critical conditions are, what you need to provide work-based assessments for, and that's set out in, as I say, section 5.4, and then it's set out in Annex 3, which goes through the critical conditions and key topics, and Annex 4, which is the index procedures. So that's all the stuff that used to be contained in the guidelines for CCT. So you're not looking at providing, you will be providing the same sort of numbers and the same sort of WBAs as you were providing under the previous curriculum or previous iterations of the curriculum. So that's what you will need to do. It also contains, as Keith showed you on his slide, it also contains the generic elements, which are obviously research, teaching and training, quality improvement, stroke audit, management in the NHS, etc. So that's where you need to go. And in the specialty specific guidance, we're quite sort of specific about how you upload your application, how you upload your evidence to GMC Connect, what sort of naming conventions you should use, and how you collect it all together. So part 3 of the specialty specific guidance is the capabilities in practice, and part 4 is the GPCs. So next slide, please. So this is really how it all fits together. So how do you provide evidence for the outcomes, the capabilities in practice, and the generic professional capabilities? And that is a collection of everything from part 1, everything from part 2, an MCR for CESR with a supervision level of 4 or 5. So that's that 6 months formative final 6-month summative final MCR completed prospectively. Or if you're not going to provide the MCR for CESR, or you're not going to be able to provide aspects of the MCR, then the items that you're going to put together in your portfolio as equivalent to the MCR. You'll also need to provide appraisal and professional development plan, and what we need is about 3 recent cycles of that. So when I say a cycle, you'll have an appraisal which has a professional development plan, and then we want to see the next appraisal so that we can see that you've achieved the things that were set out in the PDP. We want multi-source feedback. That's really, really important piece of evidence. Evidence of communication with patients. And next slide, please, Rachel. So we need evidence of communication with colleagues, evidence of partnership with patients and obtaining consent, evidence of understanding the legal aspects of consent, and examples of complaints and handling reflection on this. And John spoke about this. And so moving on, next slide, please. So basically, that's how it all fits together. So just to reiterate, where you can find everything on the JCST CESR webpage. And if the document isn't there, then there's a direct link. There's a direct link to it.
We've been recording, as you can see, we will hopefully be able to edit this and publish it somewhere, which is probably most likely on our YouTube channel, but it might take a little bit of time to do that. In the meantime, Megan will work as fast as she possibly can to field and pull up some MCQs together with the help of everybody else, and we'll be able to send those out for you, hopefully in a not too distant future, although I'll not describe any kind of timeline for fear of having violent consequences for that. As I said a little bit earlier, all this, we want you to be able to make the strongest possible application for CESR possible, and with the most chance of success. It's heartbreaking to us when people apply and really, you know, just having been to something like this and followed it and read the guidance on our website a bit more, could have put in a much stronger application that would have satisfied the GMC. So we want you all to do well. We want your application to be successful, to reward you for all the hard work that you do and all the hard work that you will do in preparing that, and then to appear on the specialist register if that's the path you want your career to take. So I think that's all from us. We're right on the dot of the end of the webinar now. So thank you once again to everybody who took part, and thank you all very much for coming. Good night. Have a good evening.